brought to you by Captivating History. The Chicago we see today is a far cry from what it would have looked like a little over 300 years ago. A vast tract of unspoiled prairie land next to a huge freshwater lake. The area was, for thousands of years, home to Native American tribes. When the French arrived in the 17th century, the Potawatomis were in residence on the southwest edge of Lake Michigan. When the Iroquois started attacking any other tribes due to competition for the fur trade, the Potawatomis moved west to continue their self-sufficient lifestyle, leaving the land to the French. The French called their new settlement Chicagoa, believed to be based on the Native American name for the wild garlic that grew abundantly in the area. In the late 18th century, Jean-Baptiste Pont de Sable, a Frenchman of African descent, is credited with establishing Chicago as a permanent European settlement. After the Iroquois Wars, also known as the Beaver Wars, the Potawatomis moved back to Lake Michigan. They traded with the French and learned their language to act as translators. The Potawatomi continued to sustain themselves through hunting and fishing, living peacefully with the Europeans and other native tribes. Their language skills meant that they could settle any disputes, and the tribe's territory grew. Despite the Potawatomis' helpful and amicable nature, in 1789 they were subject to their first land treaty. They received cash and lands further west in exchange for abandoning their settlement on Lake Michigan. Upon leaving the area, the last group of tribe members donned traditional war regalia and performed a war dance. This dance would never be seen in Chicago again. The land treaties did not stop there, and the Potawatomi lost an estimated 89 million acres of land to the Europeans. In 1867, tribal members took U.S. citizenship in an attempt to strengthen their rights, and today they are a federally recognized Native American tribe. Between 1837 and 1847, Chicago experienced a boom in the community and was America's fastest-growing city. With new transport systems in place, people and produce moved through Chicago on their way inland. Industrialists, tradespeople, and business owners moved in. Only 100 years after Europeans had settled on the pristine shores of Lake Michigan, the industrial age arrived. As a hub connecting many of the European settlements, Chicago became a tourist town. Shops sprung up to take advantage of the passing trade. Jewelry was a big business, but you could find shops selling everything from produce and housewares to building materials, photography, and insurance. The commercial sector continued to grow, and in 1887, Marshall Field, a resident of Chicago for over 20 years, commissioned the building of the first department store in Chicago. There were only two others like it in America at the time. Marshall Field's store didn't just sell products, it sold an experience. Elevator operators attended charm school, and assistants at the information desk spoke several languages and were happy to answer any questions about the store or the city. When Field died in 1906, he was one of the richest men in the country. The district in which Marshall Field's store stood is still an important commercial area of Chicago today, known as the Loop. Retail wasn't the only booming industry of Chicago. Factories provided supplies as well as jobs. Families who had traditionally supported themselves through farming were pulled towards the hustle and bustle of city life. From January 1, 1863, a new influx of workers flooded the city. The Emancipation Proclamation freed thousands of formerly enslaved black people. Needing a place to live and work, Chicago was the natural choice for many. School and housing segregation were outlawed in the city, making it the perfect place to raise their newly liberated families. Chicago had the industry, the resources, and now a seemingly endless stream of workers. But conditions for those workers were less than ideal, and factories were hazardous places to work. Fatal accidents were common, and wages were low. Before long, this wealth of workers began to organize themselves to push for better working practices. In 1867, workers went on strike, demanding that employers cap the working day at 8 hours. In 1877, a larger strike occurred, accompanied by violent protests. After 2 days of protest, police attacked around 5,000 workers on July 26th at Halsted and 16th Street. Many casualties ensued, and the clash was dubbed the Battle of the Viaduct. 34 years later, in 1911, the Occupational Disease Act and the Workers' Compensations Act passed. It wasn't until 1971 that the Illinois minimum wage law passed. It wasn't just working conditions that were bad. The industrial age brought with it many problems, chiefly pollution and sanitation issues. Population booms created waste issues, which affected the fresh water supply. To deal with the situation, planners decided to reverse the flow of the Chicago River. Workers dug canals deeper and added pumps, and water from Lake Michigan was diverted to wash the waste away from the city. Typhoid rates plummeted, and this new system only brought them 10 years of sweet-smelling success. Many attempts were made to solve the issue until 1922, when the Calumet Sewage Treatment Works were created. More plants followed, and by 1970, Chicago had the largest wastewater system in the world. Trash was also a problem. In the 1850s, there was a permanent collection of debris at the mouth of the Chicago River. When Chief Engineer Ellis Sylvester Chesbrough started installing sewers in 1852, he thought he'd kill two birds with one stone and use the trash as filler to dig in the sewer pipes. Today, many of Chicago's buildings and streets are resting on 19th century refuse. Most of the waste was dealt with the same way as the sewage and dumped into rivers. As late as the 1940s and 1950s, nuclear waste was used as landscape filler. While other cities invested in stopping landfill sites from leaching into the water table, Chicago decided these improvements were too expensive. By 1962, the city had to export nearly 3 million cubic yards of garbage to 72 different rural dumps. By the 1980s and 1990s, sanitary landfill practices were finally underway. In 1848, the city became home to the Chicago Board of Trade. This organization began to help buyers and sellers protect their investments. It was one of the first futures and options exchanges and is still trading under the umbrella of the CME Group. In 1863, the first Bank of Chicago was established by Edmund Aiken and other investors. The bank played a vital role in stabilizing Chicago after and during the American Civil War. From 1861 to 1865, Chicago was pivotal in the manufacturing and shipping of goods. While the Union and Confederate armies battled to the south, Chicago was far enough from the fighting to continue supplying goods, supplies, and transportation to the Unionists. As industry and transport were changing the face of Chicago, so too were architects. In the 1850s, workers' cottages were replaced by 3- and 4-story high houses lining residential streets. Unfortunately, in 1871, the Great Chicago Fire wiped out most historic buildings, with modern builders also having a hand in the lack of Victorian and Civil War-era architecture. Between 1890 and 1930, a new style of house was in vogue: graystone homes. With limestone quarried from Illinois, they were relatively affordable, and their design reflected a new artistic and intellectual attitude in Chicagoans. When it comes to Chicago architecture, one of the most prominent people is Frank Lloyd Wright. Wright arrived in Chicago in the late 1880s and made a name for himself with his distinctive designs that he referred to as organic. Another influential architect was LeBaron Jenney, who designed the 10-story high home insurance building, the world's first skyscraper. Chicago was also a center for politics. In 1860, the newly formed Republican Party held a convention there. So many people attended that a temporary structure named the WIGWAM was built to house the delegates and guests. This convention discussed anti-slavery declarations, as well as improving conditions for workers and settlers. The delegates also had the task of selecting a candidate for President of the United States. Abraham Lincoln won the nomination, appointing his rival, William Seward, as his Secretary of State. In 2002, the spot where the WIGWAM stood was designated a Chicago landmark. In 1893, Chicago was selected to host a World's Fair. Falling on the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival, the government wanted to go big and give the populace a dose of unity. Architect Daniel Burnham covered 600 acres of land with fairgrounds, a carnival midway, and a 264-foot Ferris wheel. He built reproductions of Columbus's 3 ships and a moving platform that looped around the grounds. For the first time, other nations were invited to participate via national pavilions. The white stucco that coated the main structures of the city and the electric lights illuminating the streets gained Chicago the nickname White City. Frederick Douglass used this moniker, a prominent ex-slave and the Haitian delegate, to lament the lack of participation that black people were allowed in the fair. Very few African Americans had jobs or exhibitions, and Douglass distributed a pamphlet entitled "The Reason Why the Colored American is Not on the World's Columbian Exposition." During the First World War, alcohol production was banned throughout America. As the war ended, people anticipated the reintroduction of their favorite tipple. However, in 1918, the nationalization of prohibition passed, becoming law on January 17, 1920. The ban lasted 13 years, and with it came the speakeasy. Around this time, a New York gang member, Alphonse Gabriel Capone, bought a house in Chicago's Park Manor neighborhood. He worked closely with local crime boss Big Jim Colosimo and his recruiter Johnny Torrio. Within 5 years, both Colosimo and Torrio had been murdered, and the gang's business fell to Capone. Capone's gang covered Chicago's South Side. Their most lucrative brothel and speakeasy was the Four Deuces and stood at 2222 South Wabash Avenue, South Loop. During the 1920s and 1930s, Capone developed a reputation as a community leader. He spearheaded a children's milk program, opened soup kitchens, and provided work via the bootleg liquor trade. But Capone's gang wasn't as compassionate as they appeared. They bullied businesses into selling their product, and those who didn't participate paid a heavy price. On February 14, 1929, 7 of Chicago's North Side gang members were led down a street in Lincoln Park and, in broad daylight, gunned down with submachine guns. The brazen nature of these murders showed the supposedly harmless industry of bootlegging in a new and shocking light. Capone was finally arrested in 1931 for the only crime that would stick: tax evasion. He served 7.5 years in prison, dying at home in 1947. Before the arrival of Europeans to the Chicago area, the Potawatomis ate a wide range of freshly caught game, wild rice, and farmed vegetables. The Europeans had different tastes and imported meats such as pork and beef, plus wheat from which to make bread. East Coast oysters were brought to Chicago by New England Americans and became so popular a brand new eatery was created, the Oyster Saloon. You can still find oyster bars throughout Chicago. Beef was a favorite delicacy, and steakhouses continued to be a prominent part of Chicago's culinary tapestry. In the 1850s, German immigrants introduced their various types of sausage, and hot dogs came onto the scene, along with beer gardens serving German beer. With this plethora of dishes to choose from, the two foods most closely associated with Chicago are the deep dish pizza, invented sometime in the 1940s or 1950s, and the Chicago-style hot dog. In 1929, Chicago suffered a stock market crash, and unemployment swept the nation. The people of Chicago switched loyalties from the Republicans to the Democrats, who had bailed them out financially. Unfortunately, the Democrats then ushered in an era of racial segregation. African Americans were denied federally funded housing schemes and mortgages. The government subsidized white families to leave the crowded urban centers for newly built suburbs, while black families were offered no such deal. By 1968, when the Fair Housing Act came into place, most African Americans could not afford homes in the affluent suburbs. In 1933, Chicago celebrated its centennial by hosting the World's Fair Century of Progress. The pavilions and exhibits had a futuristic look and took place in the lakefront Northerly Island Peninsula. The fairgrounds included the Hall of Science, a Lilliputian city of little people, and live premature babies in incubators. Probably the most famous exhibition was the House of Tomorrow, 12-sided and standing 3 stories tall. The first floor featured an airplane hangar, and the top 2 stories were made of glass. The home had a fitted dishwasher and air conditioning. In 2013, the House of Tomorrow was declared a national landmark. The Chicago City flag is itself a monument to Chicago's history and the success of the World Fairs. The first star is for Fort Dearborn, which preceded the permanent settlement. The second star is a symbol of the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The third and fourth stars represent both the Columbian Exposition and the World's Fair Century of Progress. One of Chicago's longest-lasting organizations is the Pinkertons. Founded in the 1850s as the Pinkerton National Detective Agency by Scottish immigrant Allan Pinkerton. Located at 80 Washington Street, they achieved fame in Chicago by solving a grave robbing case and became nationally renowned for discovering and preventing a plot to assassinate President-elect Abraham Lincoln. The agency had in its ranks Kate Warren, the first female detective in the United States. In 1860, Pinkerton created a female detective agency with Warren in charge. There are still Pinkerton offices across the country, and the company specializes in risk management. In 1989, Richard M. Daley was elected the city's mayor. His father, Richard J. Daley, had served as mayor for 21 years from 1955 to 1975, 1 year shy of his son's time in office. When the younger Daley came to power, the so-called Rust Belt of America began to form. Industrial and manufacturing jobs were moving to China and Japan. Mayor Richard M. Daley found a way to start a new economic era in Chicago by revitalizing the arts, beautifying the city, and expanding O'Hare Airport, which his father originally built. His bold action and risk-taking meant that Chicago did not fall into economic decline. Another famous Chicagoan is the legendary Oprah Winfrey. Not only has she inspired many, her production company, Harpo, has provided jobs, entertainment, and pride in Chicago for over 20 years. Born to a teenage mother in Mississippi, her early life resonates with many other poor Americans. While still in high school, she started working for a local all-black radio station. By the time she was 19, she was co-hosting the local evening news. Winfrey continued in newscasting until 1984, when she landed a daytime talk show in Chicago called AM Chicago. Oprah's on-screen personality won over the audience, and within months, the show became the top-rated show in Chicago. The following year, she was nominated for an Academy Award for her role in the film The Color Purple. Her fame skyrocketed, and AM Chicago was renamed The Oprah Winfrey Show. She ran the show for over 25 years, during which time she started a production company, launched magazines, and created a network. Winfrey spawned an industry with jobs for thousands of people, mainly in Chicago. She has provided charitable funds to education, Habitat for Humanity, and more. A champion of African Americans, women, and children, her visage was painted onto a mural of pioneering Chicago personalities in 2017. Modern-day Chicago is a place of skyscrapers, repurposed factories, and Generation Y startups. It counts Barack Obama amongst its famous residents, as the Obamas lived here raising their girls before setting off for the White House. Chicagoans have pride in their past, hope for their future, and some strict ideas about the thickness of pizza and hot dog toppings. Through success and adversity, Chicago's tenacity has never faltered. As Mike ROYOKO, a Chicago columnist, puts it, "What other city has made a river flow backward?" To learn more about the history of Chicago, check out our book, History of Chicago, a captivating guide to the people and events that shaped the Windy City's history. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.